Now, you talked about feeling completely stuck.
Yeah.
And now the sort of parlous state of our politics. And, the book is quite a depressing read. I mean,
No, only the first.
I wouldn't read the first half after a few gin and tonics on your own at night.
Wait a minute. No.
It's like, God.
The first review in the iPaper said the first third is brilliant doom mongering.
Yeah.
And
then it picks up.
Yeah, exactly. Thank
positivity
you.
and
hope.
Now, you set about a call for arms. In a nutshell, what is that? That's hard, isn't it? Because it's half a book. But
no, in a nutshell, it's the answer to the question, what can we do? We have to do whatever we can, all of us. So I think it's about resisting cynicism. I think it's hard, but I think we have to resist cynicism. I try to debunk these statements that you hear all the time. Nothing ever changes. We are surrounded by change. No one person can make a difference. Absolute nonsense. So many people make a difference. And they're all the same, right? They're all the same. I mean, like, you talked about Hillary Clinton. Imagine how different the world would have been if she'd have beaten Trump. Imagine how different the world would have been if Trump had beaten Biden. Imagine how different this country would be if Johnson had lost to Corbyn. The idea that they're all the same is utterly absurd. So push that all to one side. And then the next thing is basically to say to people, I'm not sugarcoating it. That's why it is a bit grim about how bad things are, how bad politics can be. But ultimately, one of my favourite bits in the book is Julia Gillard, former Australian Prime Minister, who I love. She's a great woman. And so there's a woman, working class kid from Wales, right? Born in Barry in South Wales. And family struggling, emigrate to Australia, just pretty well at school, but not a genius. And then she's got a mum of a friend of hers who says to her, you should be a lawyer, you'd be a really good lawyer, you're good at arguing. She becomes a lawyer, she gets into politics, she becomes the Prime Minister. Along the way, I mean, she made one of the most famous speeches about misogyny that's ever been made. It's absolutely brilliant. Google it if you haven't seen it. And she takes them on to their faces in the Parliament. It's absolutely brilliant. Now, and I said to her, look, if you've got an 18-year-old, she's now, academic world here. If you've got an 18-year-old student, woman, comes to you and says, I want to go into politics, what do you think? What do you say to them when you know how hard it is? She says, what I say to them, I'm not going to say it's not hard, but do it, because the joy you get out of lifting people out of poverty, out of building hospitals, about getting stuff done. And that's what you've got to see politics as. It's not the crap, it's not the slogans, it's doing stuff.
When I was reading the book and I got to the resist cynicism section, and it doesn't matter who I vote for because nothing ever changes, where I live in London, it's true in the sense that it doesn't matter who I vote for, Labour will be re-elected every time it's Hackney.
Thank God for that.
But I'm just saying,
Scotland used to be like that. Scotland used to be like that. Things change.
Yes, but...
And the point is, to people there, I say, we'll fight to get the electoral system changed.
But the question I have is, isn't part of a sense of disengagement or powerlessness because people vote and they don't think their vote necessarily counts unless you're in the 15% marginals?
Totally.
So do you think that part of Labour's package should be electoral reform?
Well, fun enough, I wrote a piece today, which I think is appearing in the iPaper on Wednesday, backing this campaign, Sort the System, Make Your Vote Matter. Now, it's not as simple as people think, by the way. Changing the electoral system is really, really hard and really, really complicated. But I do think it's time. The time has come for change. Look, I make the point that, and I kind of say this in the book, I desperately want Labour to get back in power. I desperately want Keir Starmer to get rid of the Tories. I really do. But I don't think that even that is going to be enough. We've got to change the way we do politics. And I think that I was quite excited at the weekend. I don't know if it's true or not because I haven't spoken to them about it. But when I read the thing about they're thinking about lowering the voting age, I hope they do. I really hope they do. I would back compulsory voting. I would back political education in schools. I just think we've got to change the way we do politics completely. The parties have got to wake up and wise up. I write a lot in the book about my nephew. I sent the book at various stages to lots of different young people to get their feet, I didn't want to do, even though it did start out as a kind of letter from one generation to the next, I changed that and I've actually taken in a lot of their views. And it's interesting talking to Jamie, my nephew. He's now a council leader up in Bassett Law. But he's so he's in his 30s, very bright, very committed and what have you. But when he read the first draft, he said to me, he says, look, this is just not right. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, Your politics is all about your experience, and you've always been at the very top,
Yeah, you have.
alongside a Labour leader. You've got no idea what it's like trying to make, when you've got a wife, a job, you're not that well off. And you go to Labour Party meetings and you think, God, is this what it's really about? Is this how they do it? And of course it is, because the 60s and 70-year-olds have got more time. And I've met so many young people who say, I say, have you ever been to a party meeting? They say, yeah, one. Both main parties, by the way. So we've got to change that. We've got to welcome people in and give them empowerment to feel they can make change.
And you in your section on leadership, which I found really interesting, and you talked about team building and leaders and warriors, leader giving direction and the warriors giving you the hard grind, and then the special talent that you talked about that create the spark for creativity. What would you say were your good leadership qualities, and where do you think you fell short?
Me? I think, warrior.
Aren't you all of those things a bit?
Probably, yeah. Well, Tony Blair's nickname for me was Keano. Roy Keane. And I buy that. I love that. Yeah, I like that. No, I think it's probably more interesting thing about Tony's strength in that, because I was the leader of quite a big team that I built, but I built them with his authority. The leadership skill that he had, that's the single most important, I think, is he absolutely knew what he wanted to do with the job. And he was very, very good at it. As a team leader, I think both of us had this ability to surround ourselves with people who challenged us. We didn't want people telling us we were great the whole time. We wanted to be challenged the whole time. We wanted to be made better at what we did. You remember my number 2, Godric Smith. Godric was one of my most inspired appointments. He was number 7 in the team when I arrived. And I just saw something in him. I thought, this guy's, he's what I need. He's not like me, he's different to me, but he's going to challenge me a bit. So I think you need that, the creativity. The point about, look, I'm obsessed with sport, as you know, and I hope I'm not going to miss too much of the Leicester-Liverpool game tonight. Just bear that in mind when we're signing books at the end, won't you? Not too many selfies, not too much chatting. Leicester-Liverpool, it's not my team, but, we're playing one of them next season at least. So, but I think that the understanding, I write in the thing about, to any organisation, the 3 things you need working in perfect harmony the whole time are strategy, leadership and teamship. And I see it like a wheel. It's going round and round and round. And you have to think like that. It's a mindset. And it's a mindset, I don't think that, Cameron had it until he decided to have the referendum because he went weak on strategy. Since then, I don't think any of them have had it.
To play devil's advocate a bit as well, though, when you go back to how you did run Downing Street as Director of Comms, because you talk a bit in the book about being irritated about the way you get lumped in with Dominic Cummings, and you talk a bit about why you're different people. But you are the original spin doctor, if you like, right?
No.
You are known as the original.
No.
But if
Moses.
If I ask
10 Commandments. What is that?
Classic deflection going on.
Julius Caesar.
Dealt with this before.
Greatest soundbite of all time, Veni, Vidi, Vici. Greatest soundbite of all time. Right?
But if
that was BC.
But if I talk to people in the lobby about what it was like in the early years of Campbell.
Oh, bollocks, honestly. Don't give me this stuff.
Do you look back on it sometimes and think that some of the tactics that you saw, and I'll give you a classic example. Shortly after the election, we go to a briefing, and we walk into Downing Street, and Lee Kane is there. Actually, he's not there originally. One of his sort of juniors is there, and they separate out the journalists, and half of us go to it's been written about, so half go to one side, half go to the other, and then we're told that half, i.e. people they don't like, or papers that they think are hostile, or journalists that they think that they're not coming into the briefing, right? And actually, it was written about at the time. We all looked at each other and we're like, well, we all have to leave, and we all left. Everyone left. And for some of the particularly conservative support in papers, for those individual journalists, that was difficult, right? Because they're going to get it in the neck. When I give you that example, can you, in all honesty, say that when you were running the shop, there weren't times that you did that to journalists that were out of favour with Blair, or not that particular example, but that type of treatment?
Well, look, just, you know, I put the briefings on the record. I always assumed anything I said was on the record anyway. I didn't really believe. Look, you have friends. You know, I'd been a journalist, but you know Don McIntyre, right? Don McIntyre worked on The Independent, in the lobby, very close friend of mine when we were journalists together. And so when I got the job with Tony, I remember Don saying to me, he said, "Oh, God, yeah, quite good you've been in there." And I said, "Don, you just got to understand, I'm not a journalist anymore. I'm not working for you or the media, I'm working for the Labour Party." And I was always very, very clear about that. So we put the briefings on the record. Anybody would come to them. In fact, I remember the lobby, the Westminster press, getting really pissed off because we allowed the foreign media to come, we allowed the regional media to come in. So we tried to open it up, tried to be much more kind of open. Look, did I sometimes get really, really aerated and what have you? And I didn't ever, we'd never, ever have done that. Never. There was no newspaper that we ever told couldn't come on a trip, ever. So no, I think a lot of these spads that this guy from the Justice Department was talking about, I think they've got a sort of sense of what we were like that's more based on Malcolm Tucker than the reality. I really believe that. I think they think that's how we ran it. I ran a very, very firm ship. I was very, very clear that we had to be clear about our strategy every single minute of every single day. And we had to be setting the agenda as best we could in a very difficult media environment. I think journalists underestimate, and social media's made it worse, of course, but you underestimate just how hard it is to get your message through. When you try, I don't care about the media. I care about getting a message to the public. And the media are sometimes the vehicle, but they're often the barrier. So you have to be cleverer than them in thinking about how you get over them, through them, round them. And occasionally, you know, you have to call them out.
I mean, the danger of that as well is that with social media is that often politicians can just go directly to the public and then they avoid scrutiny as well.
Yeah,
so
I know, and that's what's happening now. That's what's happening.
I'm going to ask you one more thing, and I don't want to trigger your W button. Do you want to tell everyone what your W button is? It's in the book.
My W button. My W button was W for wanker. And it's a button that I have in my head when I feel my temper rising. And I switch it on. And because what happened was I was doing a Q&A a bit like this with Matt Ford, the comedian, who's very funny, by the way. If you've ever seen his live political shows, they are funny. And he said to the audience, he said, right, we haven't got much time, short questions, short answers. And this guy asked a question that I could feel the buttons were being pressed, right? The buttons were being pressed. And so he asked the question, and it wasn't that unreasonable. It was basically, he was kind of saying I was a war criminal, but he wasn't quite saying that, right? But anyway. So he got to the end of his question, he sat down, and I said, right, you wanted short answers, wanker. And so people laughed, right? And I felt really bad. I felt really bad. I did.
So now you have a mechanism in your head.
Well, it doesn't always work. I don't know if you saw Newsnight last Thursday.
Yeah, did you feel like you pressed the button?
Hey?
Did you feel like you pressed the button? Do you regret it? Seriously, did you feel like you pressed the button? You really lost your temper. Well, yeah, you did. You
no, not really. No, Beth.
No, is that not?
No.
That was quite cross in my world, but I'm very, very serene, aren't I?
I didn't headbutt a single wall, did I? No.
I hope not. Is that a big hole in the green room we haven't seen?
I don't know, it's complicated. The reason that I didn't activate the W button is because it was overwhelmed by the scale of the Wing. Or the Wology. I mean, honestly, there just comes a point where you think, I can't tolerate listening to this absolute bilge and seeing them just bilge away. And it's like, how would you do? So I'll tell you what I did regret, and I apologise for it immediately, was kind of turning on Victoria Derbyshire. Yeah, I did, because I do think I was right on the cultural point. I do think that the BBC and lots of the media, they get these people on as though they're kind of independent commentators. They're part of what created this mess. So they come along now and they say, oh, well, if only we're doing this and this and this. You're all part of it. You promised this was going to be easy, and it's not. So, yeah, did I regret it?
So
I'll tell you what, I'm very happy that Fiona had already gone to bed. And by the time she saw I was trending on Twitter in the morning, she decided not to watch it. I'm very happy about that.
Would she have told you off?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Well, look, my final question, my final question, though, is to come back to the role of trust. And I think you know, I've got to ask, it's in the book, and it's the Iraq War. Mm-hmm. It was an event that undermined trust in politics, that in many ways became a defining event of Tony Blair's premiership and legacy, which, you know, you've spoken about all the other things that he did, but this is the thing that has defined him. So when you talk about kind of trust being undermined in politics, did you reflect when you were doing this book that for some people, they might think that you're part of the problem, not the solution?
Yeah.
That was the beginning of it. Did you think about that? Did that make you feel uncomfortable writing it?
No. I address it briefly.
You do address it?
I do address it. I don't address it in detail because I actually think, I did an interview on Times Radio the other day, and the guy said, you know, obviously most people think you're really just about Iraq. And I said, well, no, you think that. But actually, I honestly, this is, you know, this could be famous last words, and I could walk out tonight and I'd get mobbed by a load of, you know, Iraq war protesters, which has happened in the past. But it's very rare these days that members of the public come up to me and want to talk about Iraq. Now, if they do, I'm perfectly polite. I'm perfectly willing to engage with them and talk about anything. But I think it's one of those situations which, see, when you say Tony Blair's defined by Iraq, I mean, I go, like I mentioned Albania. I go to Albania, and we're defined by the people on who they model their election strategy. 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. You talk to anybody who was at that, and they define Tony Blair as the guy who actually, without whom that would never have happened. You know, so I won't do it here, but I can list for hours all the stuff. I accept that Iraq is a big, big part of the legacy, and I accept that it's seen negatively. And by the way, not universally. There are still people you can get, the Kurds in particular, there are still people in Iraq who will say that it was far better without Saddam than with. But I understand that trust was affected.
Did it undermine trust?
Of course it did. Because, you know, there's a bit in my diaries where John Scarlett, the head of the Joint Intelligence Committee, comes into my office and said, I'll never forget this. He was such a nice guy, John, but he said, how bad would it be if turns out we don't find the weapons of mass destruction?
Yeah.
What? How bad would that be? I said, well, that would be really, really, really bad because it wasn't the only case that we made, but it was a big part of that case. So I completely get why people say that. But all I say is, I think there is, you know, I say why I'm not Dominic Cummings, because I don't care how often anybody tells me we lied about Iraq, I know that we didn't. Were we possibly misled? Were we proved wrong? Yes, that is not the same as lying. What I know about Cummings is that they built a campaign around lies. And the other thing I'd say that separates me from him and Tony from Johnson, I wouldn't have worked for, you know, the best years of my life, separating myself, as I say, a lot of the time, travelling, away from home, never see your kids. I wouldn't have done that unless I'd fundamentally believed in what we were trying to do and that it was worth it. And I still believe that now, even when I look back and I know, you know, I was telling you earlier, I'll go to my grave. You don't know this, but Callum, who I mentioned, who's a recovering alcoholic, you know, I spend loads of time thinking, God, I wonder if he'd have drunk like that if I'd have been around more. It's inevitable, right? But I still think it was I still think it was worth doing. And so that's why I say to people, I'm not sugarcoating politics, but you know, I give a little thing at the end about why it's worthwhile doing it. And it's worthwhile doing it because it is still the means by which you change the world for the better.